My name is Alia Ramji, and I am a partner at McCarthy Tetro and the lead of MT Ventures. I am delighted to be here this morning. We have Jeff Mangiocalda from Coursera today, the CEO of Coursera. And Coursera, as you know, is an open online course provider. Jacques Vanderbroek, the CEO and chairman of the board for Randstad Holdings. Randstad is a multinational HR consulting firm. Aruna Jayanthi, the managing director of Asia Pacific and Latin America of Capgemini. Capgemini is a digital transformation and consulting firm. And finally, Steve Lucas from iCIMS. iCIMS is the talent cloud company that empowers organizations to attract, engage, and hire talent. We are so lucky to have all of these esteemed panelists with us today. Thank you so much for joining us. I first want to open up the floor with, your comments and your general thoughts about the workplace of the future. I'm going to start with Jeff.
Yeah, Alia, thank you for having me here. It's been quite a year, 2020. We went to remote work at Coursera on March 6th. I have not been back in the office yet. And we recently told employees that we don't expect them to come back to the office if they don't want until 2022. So we've been working remotely this entire time. And not much beyond Coursera, we see a huge demand in online learning, definitely from individuals who come directly to Coursera, but also businesses. And World Economic Forum just put out the Future of Jobs 2020 report last week. We see dramatic increases in companies investing and accelerating in digital transformation and reskilling. So we've actually seen big tailwinds in our Coursera for Business channel, and even bigger is in the universities and colleges. So obviously universities have been closed down. They're trying to figure out how to teach online. Most of them do not have a lot of content, and they've really been turning to our partners' courses on Coursera to help them teach online. So we see, as probably almost everybody else does, a massive shift not only to online learning, but also to remote working. And we think this really just accelerates some of the major trends that have been happening for many years now.
Thank you, Jeff. And Jacques, to build on that, we've had a discussion about, the reskilling and retooling for some of the people that you're seeing through Randstad. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you see as the workforce of the future?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, if you look at the workforce of the future, we see COVID as a blip. With different dynamics than you would expect, or at least we expect in the labor market going forward. Technology won't hit blue-collar jobs. It will hit white-collar jobs, very repetitive white-collar jobs. And it's good that Coursera sees a lot of traffic. Having said that, I do feel that there are a lot of people in repetitive administrative jobs now that need to be reskilled towards technology jobs, healthcare jobs, and educational jobs. And COVID, having said, is a blip which hits mostly short-term blue-collar workers. A lot of sectors that are now heavily hit will bounce back once we have a vaccine in retail, in restaurants, that sort of thing. But if you're working for an airline, you should seriously consider reskilling. So interesting dynamics. What we see, because we also have an outplacement business, is that people, reskilling, it's tough, to really see after you've done the same job for 20, 25 years, reskilling, why? And if so, where to? And then finally, but who takes care of that? For me. And that's a big issue, because in the US, but also in Europe, the infrastructure to help the inflow of hundreds of thousands of people without a job into reskilling, that's massive. And those systems really can't handle that. So we're advocating huge public-private partnerships with the likes of Coursera, with the likes of employers, with the likes of government to get this going. The good news is, once COVID is over, we're going to be short of people, mostly because of the demographics. But at the same time, a huge mismatch. So interesting times.
Interesting times indeed. And Aruna, you have a real global perspective of this because you're sitting in Mumbai today, but you're directing a pool of talent that's all over the world and specifically in Canada. So what are your thoughts about the workplace of the future?
Alia, I see almost the same trend everywhere in the 15 odd countries that I'm responsible for today. So there are two clear trends that I see. Okay, the first is that there is digitization and automation extensively across every industry, and the nature of work itself is changing. Okay, in terms of what kind of roles, how the roles are being reshaped. So the content and the scope of the work itself is changing at one level thanks to digitization and automation. The second part is that a distributed workforce is now here to stay. So distributed, I mean remote working, people not necessarily just working from home, but working for any part of the globe. So work we see is no longer a place you go to. It's not an office that you go to and work. I mean, you can be distributed anywhere in the world and then perform the same level of work. But what this, and people, customers of ours who were unwilling to accept it at some point of time would say, no, you have to be in our office, you have to work locally with us, are now accepting it. So I don't think there's any going back from that anymore. What we see as the consequence of this is twofold. One is, what does this whole change mean for an employee? And, what does it mean for him to adapt to the new vision of work, the new ways of working in a much more digitized world? What does it mean in terms of reskilling? And clearly the other two, Jeff and Jacques, talked about that. Second aspect of it is, what does it mean from the perspective of an organization? And I don't believe that organizations can just say, okay, let's work in a distributed manner. I think organizations need to reinvent their operating model, the way that they work, the way that they engage with their employees. So I think there's a big change that needs to happen, both for the employees to be relevant and for the organizations to be relevant in the new world.
That's an interesting perspective. So we have to look at it from two different angles, the employee's angle and the organization's angle. And Steve, you are looking at a talent pool through the cloud, and what is the leading sectors where you're seeing talent being taken up over the course of the last 6, 12, 18 months?
Yeah, first of all, I agree with, I think, what everyone has shared, commentary-wise, number one, and number two, just in terms of leading into the sectors, we're seeing some very radical shifts right now, and I think that those areas or shifts are not just in the obvious areas like airlines or more broadly hospitality. Clearly, that industry, especially hospitality, has been impacted radically. But those jobs aren't necessarily going away over the long term. They're just transforming. They're shifting. For every one job that we see that's being displaced in an industry like hospitality, for example, we can see some percentage or modicum of that where that job or a reskilled version of it shows up in other areas. So retail is a case in point. We're talking about warehouse work. We're talking about delivery. All of that is in radical growth mode right now. And it's not just Amazon. I think as the world shifts to online nearly everything right now, not just as a matter of convenience, but out of necessity, we're seeing that be a big disruption driver across multiple industries. But there is no doubt in my mind for the 4,500 companies that we serve, from Microsoft and Amazon to Pepsi, FedEx, and the like, that these companies are dramatically rethinking, where do we put our workers? What do we define as work in terms of full-time, part-time, as mentioned, blue collar, white collar? We're hearing this phrase or term new collar emerge as far as how do we reskill employees. But also we're seeing some significant shifts from that full-time and part-time or even contingent labor to gig work. Here in the United States, we know that about 35% of the population participates in some form of this gig economy, Uber and the like. But the reality is that even organizations, companies themselves are rethinking, how do we take a full-time worker And while we keep them in that job, HR, marketing, finance, engineering, whatever it may be, how do we create opportunities for internal gig work, project-based opportunities? So we're seeing shifts all over the place, not just industry by industry, but within companies themselves, radical changes.
It's interesting. All of you have spoken about reskilling and retooling, and I wanted to get to this, much later in our conversation, but I think this is the exact point where we should be talking about the avenues for reskilling and retooling and how employers look at reskilling and retooling and how employees look at reskilling. And I'm going to go back to Jeff again, because how do you look at, some of the courses that you're delivering on Coursera where you're getting a certificate rather than a degree? Jeff, you've talked about, reskilling and retooling and getting certificates from Randstad, for example. Jacques, you've talked about that. So between Jeff and Jacques, I'd love to hear your thoughts about reskilling and retooling and how employees and employers look at this in different manners.
It's evolving pretty quickly. I think that 5 years ago, there was a big focus on culture of learning where someone who heads up HR or the chief learning officer would say, we just heard from our CEO that we need to have learning organizations. So let's celebrate learning. Let's create, lots of access to content and just tell everybody like this is an important thing. And that's better than doing nothing. But we have seen emerge since then a much more focused and operational approach to learning that seems to be quite a bit more effective. And what I mean by that is this: really looking at who needs to learn which skills to do which jobs. Then you say, okay, so this is the way this role is transforming, or we need a lot more data engineers, or we need to shift the way that our marketers are doing marketing and to introduce a lot more digital marketing into the mix. Then you say, well, what skills does a digital marketer need?
Just jumping in.
Then you say, okay, now which content will teach those?
So that
and with respect to credentials, we look at it pretty simply, which is a credential, whether that's a degree, whether it's a badge, whether it's a course completion certificate, or whether it's a company-specific credential that the company creates. A credential simply signals that someone knows something, and sometimes it signals that they've been selected for something, but generally means that they know something, and the value of the credential is based on the value of the underlying skills that they know and the credibility and selection or selectivity of the institution that issues the credential. But there'll be many credentials: college degrees, sub-college degrees, certificates. There'll be a continuing explosion of credentials as we go forward.
And Jacques, Randstad actually has these credentials that you're giving out. Can you talk a little bit more about those credentials?
Yeah, sure. So on the front end of the credential, so to say, you'll see the hard skills. So to what Jeff is saying, what can this person do? What are his capabilities? Not so much because of finishing school, but by working in a company for the last 5 years in multiple jobs. So that's the front part is the hard part, the hard skills, and that's what you normally get when you finish a school. The interesting thing about our certificates is on the back side, there's also soft skills, because increasingly soft skills. So we talked about gig work inside companies, so project-based work. It's all about a new team. It's all about working together. The soft skills might be even more important. And also, we talked about structural scarcities and lack of people. And we do still see that quite a lot of sectors, again, healthcare, education, also technical companies, the ones who have the toughest time finding people are still relying on almost, would call them old-fashioned, but too much, this is the certificate you need. But, that's not going to cut it. So very much with Jeff on this one, that we need to define what needs to be done. We need to define what someone can do and then bridge the gap with very targeted learning. And we're not there yet, by the way, to put it mildly.
Steve, you're probably seeing your talent pool being assessed for hard and soft skills as well. Can you talk to us a little bit about the soft skills that you're seeing instead of the hard skills?
Soft skills, I think all of it necessitates one critical thing. And that is, as employers, we have to become profoundly more connected intimately with the skills, competencies, et cetera, of our existing employee base, whether those are soft or hard. So we're asking these big questions. How do we retrain and reskill workers who are displaced due to changing economic conditions or dynamics that, may be due to COVID or may not be, depending on the industry. And I think we kind of lump everything into COVID dynamics, but there's a lot of economic dynamics and public health dynamics going on right now. But obviously COVID is the great disruptor of our time right now. But as was alluded to as well, people are being displaced by technology. When you have this massive disruption that is followed by, I believe, an equally, if not all the more equivalent response or disruption in technology. And that's what we're experiencing right now. Even 5 years ago, it was laughable as a CEO if someone came to me and said, hey, the entirety of your workforce is going to be working from home. No one will go into the office. Yet here we are. And now if you think and say, okay, 7 months post-COVID, what's changing? Well, what's changing is, think about soft skills like, digital residence. I had never seen that phrase in a job description. And we have a machine learning technology that's looking at job descriptions that our customers are using to post for the millions, if not tens of millions of hires that they're making on an annualized basis through our talent cloud. And we're seeing even notional things like the job description for a salesperson. It was boardroom presence, 90% travel, all of these things that have been zeroed out. Now that we're all online, what matters? Well, what matters is things like, can I resonate with you digitally? So there's some notional aspects to that I think are very, very real. But really what it comes down to is, I just think as well, we have to stop thinking about like putting everyone in one category. Someone that worked at a grocery store pre-COVID, we would have said, and I think inappropriately so, we would have called unskilled labor or workers. Yet now we say that they're essential workers, and I absolutely agree with that. They are extraordinarily essential. But what this all calls for is, we as employers, we must do a better job of identifying the talent base in our organization, number one. Number two is understanding those skills, the competencies. That's the second thing. Then the third is, how do we map those to a developmental process, everything that's been articulated here. So for me, it's about really what it comes down to is, use technology to get intimately connected with your workforce, create a digital profile of every single employee, every single contractor, every single gig worker, and really start to understand that shape so that you can evolve it.
Aruna, I can see that you're chomping at the bit to get in here. So I'd love to hear your thoughts, especially, from a global perspective.
So I agree with everything that's been said. It's just one point to add, which is that I think at the end of the day, we got to empower the employees in order to create their own career path. Okay, and which means that you got to be very clear to them on what are the playing fields, how is the nature of work changing for them. So, for example, every role, okay, you could be an accountant, you could be a customer service agent, you could be a salesperson, a cloud engineer, or whatever that is. I think they need to understand, how is my role changing? What will it look like? Or as far as we know today, how will it look like in the next 2 years and 3 years? And what do I need to prepare? So to that extent, we owe it to them to define what are the playing fields and what are the learning paths. And, potentially, okay, if you want to be the best architect in the world in this area, these are the 5 or 6 things. So while they are individual courses, we need to define that roadmap for them, and then give them a path that over a period of time, with their own convenience and flexibility, they can get to that point. So I think there's a big responsibility that we have in terms of empowering them and allowing them to make their future.
You talk about empowering and allowing employees to dictate their future. And Steve, you talked about how, 5 years ago, if someone had said to you your entire workforce would be working online, we would have laughed. And so leadership obviously has a big role to play in empowering these employees. So how does leadership have to revise their management strategy as we move online? What new managers or what new challenges do you see senior managers facing in the COVID world, and then of course, as Jacques said, it's a blip. So the post-COVID world, where things are back to technology really driving us. So Steve, I'd love to hear from you first. What does leadership have to do here?
We talked about digital skills, even etiquette. Best practices to effectively communicate in either partly or entirely remote virtual settings. And what we're doing right here, conferences like this one, they're reducing barriers for people to attend, but at the same time, we're changing the way that we think about meeting and networking and connecting in general. And to me, it comes to this central point of culture. A lot of what we relied on as leaders was interpersonal dynamics of connecting in person, looking someone in the eyes, at least physically. And it's difficult because, and I don't want to get too heady right now, but hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years of human evolution, we sat around fires, we talked about the buffalo hunt, metaphorically. And we've gone from that in this point in time to everybody's remote and stay home. And unplugging that from what is an extraordinarily important part of building culture right now, it's going to be very interesting to see what results. But number one is leaders must adapt in terms of accessibility. This cannot be something where the CEO is rarely seen or only engages at specific altitudes. Absolutely must change our operating altitude as a CEO or any leader for that matter. The second is, how do we define culture in this environment? We were just chatting prior to this thing getting started. Some of us, and I heard it was Jeff, but mentioned that some of us aren't going to go back to full-time office work until mid or late 2022, and that's becoming more and more clear. So, as that is the case, that this is a marathon, not a sprint. How do we drive culture? How do we as leaders become more authentic? How do we create more growth opportunity for our employees? Because with this newfound flexibility of remote, here's the other thing that happens. The other thing that happens is the transient nature of industries that we see. This is going to shift. It becomes radically easier for someone to say, well, I'm working for this company over Zoom. Let me unplug and work for that one over Zoom. How much difference does it make? So we have to rethink our companies. We have to rethink our culture, rethink our benefits. How do we attract and then ultimately advance and retain talent? All of that must be rethought. I think we are profoundly mistaken if we believe that this will just be a blip on the larger kind of, path towards, normalcy. I think this is going to have lasting impact for decades to come.
Jacques, I know you have some thoughts about this as well here.
I don't think it's a blip. So we've seen delayering of organizations for a long time now. And management used to be command and control, and you were justified to be a manager because you were passing on information. So information now goes directly to individuals. It's interesting. So in my job, we're in 38 countries. We're actually not an HR consulting firm. We're mostly a staffing firm. But anyway, we do some consultancy on the side. I used to be in a plane every week because at the end of the day, reaching out to people, being with your clients physically, that's always the most superior thing. At the same time, I'm now at home, a little bit like Jeff said, almost all the time. But I connect directly way more to my people and to my stakeholders. So I think it's a different style. But I don't think, for us, for me, COVID just speeds up things which were already happening for a long time, and totally with the fact that it's about culture, it's about purpose, but it's also a new style. So if your workforce has been working from home 8 months now, and they used to be together, and that is a part of why they like the job. And if that's taken away, then motivating them is also a different style. So not new, already happening, but definitely speeding up.
Aruna, you sit in wearing different hats in different countries. Are there different challenges in say, for example, in Toronto or in India or somewhere else in the world, or are the challenges the same regardless of where you are in the world?
I think challenges are broadly the same. However, you have to consider certain local cultural issues to that one. For example, if you're working in India or in China, which is a very, they will listen to you. You tell them you wear a mask, they will wear a mask. You tell them you do this, they will do that, right? So it's a different culture than, let's say, in some of the Western parts of the world. So you have to take these into consideration while building the organization. I think leadership role then translates really into how am I building a culture of autonomy and accountability? You're not watching over the people. You're not there from 9 to 5, 9 to 6, looking over their shoulder and team supervisors don't tell the people what to do. So you have to allow people to work in an environment where they define their own pace, their flexibility, and you have to move to a totally an outcome-based managerial culture. And that's a difficult transition. In some countries, it's not so difficult in other countries. But what we find the most is that how do you build engagement and build loyalty? What are the rituals that you have? Because every organization will have some level of rituals, which is okay. It could be maybe a weekly sales meeting. It could be a monthly get together to build some bonding. I think what really I find different is every country will have a different way in which they will build these rituals to start building employee loyalty, to build that bonding, to build that sense of community. Otherwise, who are we? We're just we could be a collection of subcontractors working from elsewhere. I think so. The biggest leadership task is to really bring this, motley group together and say, okay, we are collectively out to achieve this ambition. I think that is the biggest thing that leadership needs to accomplish now, no matter which country they are in.
Jeff, Aruna says that, you've got to bring people together. Can you learn those skills? Can you learn how to do that? And is there something on Coursera that teaches you how to do that? Or how are you training people to become leaders?
Well, I think there's more traditional leadership development that has to do with communication and influencing, setting vision, and getting people aligned and motivated to go after it. I do think it's different now. Different in the way that you go about it. I think the fundamentals, like Jacques said, I think are pretty similar. But the tools that we have and the way that people are experiencing work is substantially different. I mean, if you're sitting in a room by yourself most of the time that you're working, that's a different physical experience. What we've done at Coursera, I don't know that others will do it, but probably will, is, and as Jacques said as well, I'd spend a lot less of my time on planes. One of the things I've decided is that every Monday, I am the first person that welcomes all of our new hires into Coursera. And I've been doing it sort of every now and again, giving a presentation about why we're here, what our purpose is, why the company was founded, why the world needs us, who are our customers, all this stuff that orients someone as to why are we here and what does success look like, and then what does it feel like to be an employee in this company. I get to do that all personally now every Monday morning to every single person who joins Coursera. And that's one part of connecting with people. We used to have a monthly all hands. We do that now weekly. So every week we all dial in, and because it's on Zoom and people aren't flying around, you can touch people and connect with people so much more frequently. As someone said, delayering. I am now meeting with every new employee, every employee in the company each week. Every quarter, I have a skip level. So I meet every week with my direct reports, as I always have, one-on-one and then as a team. And then I also do skip levels every quarter. So I meet personally with everybody that reports to everybody who reports to me. And that's not something I was able to do so much when I was traveling around. So I do think that these points of connection, communication are an important part of building community and culture. And we can do a lot more of that using this kind of technology.
But maybe Aliyah,
go ahead. Yeah.
you talked about challenges. There are, of course, quite a few challenges because the system of government, the system of certification, the system of trade unions, the system of social benefits in Europe is not built for what we're now describing. So in Europe, there will be hundreds of thousands of people who are unemployed coming to the market. There will be, as there's still severance and also social plans and that sort of thing. So it's not very simple. We talked about the fact that white-collar jobs over time are going to be under pressure. Well, the white-collar jobs are, certainly in Europe, the ones that hold social security systems together. We talked about gig work. Well, it's great to be a gig worker, but if you are an uninsured a gig worker and you've been working for 30 years, and then who's going to take care of you? So in a way, we feel that we're on the verge of this big social innovation that needs to happen, because it is, to a certain extent, a bit of a privileged conversation that we're having on people who have a great employability, who move around in Silicon Valley or being hired, blah, 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 blah. But that's not the real world, honestly speaking. The real world is people who are terribly afraid. They're early 40s, mid 40s, they got a mortgage, and they know their job's under pressure. And this is very much what in Europe, but also to a certain extent in the US, the yellow vests are all about. Populism is all about. It is this, where am I going? Because the world used to be simple. You used to have a job, you used to be taken care of by your employer. And now what? So talk about leadership, also political leadership. There needs to be some different messages out there. To let people believe that we're going to take care of them. At the same time, also saying you're also responsible yourself for your career. So, it is. There are a few challenges out there with all this.
Jacques, you've transitioned us very, very well when you talk about governments and what needs to be done through government. And so a question just came in online. It says, how can municipalities and governments support organizations in the workplace of the future? So I'd love to hear from all of you about, what can municipalities and governments do given this changing technological world that we're in right now? And why don't we start with Aruna?
So I think what governments or local units can do is to really help us in ways in which we can encourage a global workforce. So, for example, to say that, look, if I'm sitting in Toronto, how can I make it easy for somebody to work in another part of the world, or to recruit them, or to bring them over? I think these are some of the things today that are still quite difficult in many parts of the world.
How about you, Jacques? What are your thoughts on this? Yeah.
If you, for example, look at the US, 90% of the jobs is being created in certain areas, and unemployment is in the rural areas. And what is interesting about the US, it leads the world in tech, but 40 to 50% doesn't have decent Wi-Fi. So if you want to have a distributed workforce and people need to work from home and whatever, well, you need to take care of a digital infrastructure so that everybody can participate, next to, of course, education, so that they're able to do those jobs. To a certain extent, that is the same in Europe. In Europe, the challenge is less so. Digital infrastructure in Europe is way more dispersed than it is in the US, so that's not really an issue, but people are very afraid of the changes. And again, the sectors that have demand, logistics was mentioned, healthcare was mentioned, education was mentioned. The salaries in those jobs are roughly 20 to 25% less than the salaries of the white-collar people who actually, over time, I think, will need to fill those jobs. It's not so much what governments can do or municipalities, it is what we, public-private partnership, need to do. So, for example, stack data so that we know what people are able to do and where there's the demand. And then together with educational institutions, the Coursera's of this world move way faster, by the way, than your traditional universities, whatever. They're really old-fashioned and slow. So we need to have an educational agenda, you need to have data collection, you need to also have salary mismatches or matches, so to say. This doesn't happen overnight, and we run the risk, as already, by the way, happening in Europe and US, that a lot of people will be left behind and not taken care of.
Alia, if I could just add one point.
Please.
So I think the distributed model allows us now to employ some people who in other conditions may not have had the opportunity to work. Okay? Let me take a diversity angle here. Okay, so when I see many women are not willing to, are not able to put in a in a full 8-hour job or something like that, or to be able to go to work because of certain restrictions at home or their ability to stay away for so long because of their responsibilities. I think what I'm finding is that this environment of a distributed work environment gives us an opportunity to really open up the workforce to some of these people, and especially in rural areas or other areas like Jacques mentioned, which they never would have had to, because they would have had to relocate. Now they don't have to relocate. They can stay where they are and do something. So I look at it also from a CSR. It's not a government responsibility, but then I think it's an organization responsibility that we can say that this model now allows us to hire 5% of our workforce from rural areas or underdeveloped areas, to hire women who would have not otherwise had a chance. So I think it's up to us really, and not so much the government, to do anything in order to drive these changes.
Yeah, but for
really
these people to be remotely working, they do need to have access to digital infrastructure. Otherwise, it won't happen, right? And that is not the case. Well, that is not the case in the US. That's interesting, right? So in Silicon Valley, people are toppling all over each other, cannot find a place to live because it's also expensive, because everybody wants to live in the same quarter mile. And we have hundreds of people at the other end of the country. Well, I'm not an American, but I would feel someone needs to take an initiative, and currently it's not being done not by companies, not by the government, and certainly not together.
If I may, just make a couple comments building on what Aruna said. I think, first of all, I disagree that we don't have the digital infrastructure. It's not a country issue. Just having worked, across the globe, as all of us have, I think there's plenty of digital infrastructure. I mean, we have these in the United States last time I checked. My point is, it's not just about, sure, digital infrastructure matters. I don't think we need in the U.S. some, technology New Deal to get us out of this economic downturn like we did with the New Deal and Franklin Delano Roosevelt in 33 to 39. That's not what we need. I think your comment around, Jacques, around government and public and private sector partnership around things like Social Security, absolutely. I think people need to feel secure. That I completely agree with. But I think to Aruna's point, let's be clear. This zeroing out of where you live is profound, because if you look at the technology or the companies that I've worked for that are largely Western in terms of mentality, whether that's Europe or the US, Canada, whatever that may be, largely those companies, and I have plenty of employment data to back me up on this, most of those companies employ, if you're European-based or US-based, largely employ European and or US-based resources. Yet we ignore 2/3 of the world's population that exists largely in Asia Pacific. And the truth is, talent is equally distributed. Opportunity is not. So as we zero out location, we have a profound opportunity to find and discover new talent. Are there digital infrastructure needs? Absolutely. But even our own expansion, aggressive expansion across the entirety of Asia Pacific, even post-COVID, has not been limited by lack of technology infrastructure. What it's been limited by is knowing where is the talent, what are their skills, and how do we as companies access that talent, bring them in, and then get them on their way to long tenure and growth with our organization. So to be clear, I don't think that digital infrastructure is hindering in any way the opportunity to diversify your economic or geographic base of employees at all. And in fact, I think there's an ethical mandate that we should be staring down right now and going after, which is, how do we diversify, to Aruna's point? This is the I think most compelling opportunity out of all of this, is let's diversify our base. Let's capitalize on the expansion of addressable talent through this new digital kind of means or infrastructure that we have. I think undoubtedly governments will step up and deliver, as they should, on things like digital infrastructure. But make no mistake about it, and then I'll stop talking here, is this wave of gig and contingency and location, geographic, this disruption, it is happening right now, and it is not going to go away, whether there's infrastructure for it entirely or not.
Well, by the way, on this movement of people, the US government is giving out way too little visas currently for immigration workers, and Europe doesn't even have an immigration policy for the people that need to be found. It's quite tough for people to move around physically because quite a lot of people still want to move around and want to work in a country. So probably the real alternative is going to be the remote workforce because that makes it way easier. But then I totally agree with you, Steve, finding these people, even in India, where at first glance the numbers sort of match up. But if you specifically go into certain profile, you're also short of people in India and for the world. So again, there's a massive reskilling. So Jeff, Coursera, over to you.
Yeah. No, I often say that the twin pillars of greater social equity are online learning, which takes location out of the learning equation, and remote work, which takes location out of the employment equation. And especially when you put those two things together, one without the other is powerful. The two together, I think, are revolutionary because the basis for economic opportunity generally is educational opportunity. And now I think for the first time, someone can learn whatever skills they need subject to having connectivity. I do think that's important. As an employer, there's a big enough talent pool for me to go after without any new infrastructure. But there's a lot of people in the States, in Latin America, in Africa, in the Middle East who don't have very good connectivity. And I do think that governments need to make sure, as a matter of social equity, that there's at least a standard level of connectivity because connectivity is going to be the source of opportunity, learning opportunity, and job opportunity. I think largely, though, companies, once that the infrastructure is in place, they're going to find there's a talent pool that's global. These visa frictions will become less of an obstacle. And once individuals realize that they can learn and earn without leaving their community, I think they will see greater motivation to develop skills and see economic opportunity. So I'm feeling pretty positive about it.
Just on that note, one of the final questions we have coming out of this chat today is, what advice do we have for those who are currently unemployed or underemployed? People who have been affected by the pandemic, people who have been affected by technology and are struggling to find new employment opportunities within their industry, outside of their industry, but at their appropriate level. What advice do you folks have for the unemployed or underemployed right now? Jeff, let's start with you.
Sure. Here's the good news. The good news is, the bad news is things are changing rapidly and jobs are sometimes going away more quickly than they were before. The good news is access to education and access to job opportunity will be, I think, better than ever in terms of those who can reskill, who can develop new skills. We'll see, Microsoft estimates 150 million new digital jobs created in the next 5 years, from 50 million today to 150 million additional within 5 years. What it's going to take, though, and I think Jacques kind of hits on this a bit, it takes time, it takes focus, it takes effort. It takes a little bit of money to get an education, but not a lot. You don't need a college degree for a lot of these entry-level digital jobs. On Coursera, we have these, what we call them, gateway certificates. They're professional certificates created by Google, by IBM, by Salesforce, by Facebook, by Intuit. They train you to do a digital entry-level role. From there, you can earn a college degree fully online, delivered on Coursera, and then suddenly you've got a set of credentials that started with a professional certificate and then expands to a college degree. Anybody can do it, but they're going to have to believe that learning is their ticket to economic opportunity, and that's going to take, a lot of effort. I mean, it takes a lot of effort and focus and concentration to learn some of the skills that need to be learned, but we try to make it as easy as possible and as accessible as possible on Coursera.
Great, thanks, Jeff. Jacques, what do you think? What's the advice you would give to the unemployed or underemployed right now?
Let's not sugarcoat it. So short term, for many people, it will be tough because there are some sectors that are not going to bounce back before there is a vaccine. You can find something temporary and then take it from there. But the good advice is, to go to the likes of us. So Randstad, Robert Half, Adecco, Legis. So the sector at large, last year we provided 58 million people with a job. and many of them with applicable training, So just check it out online and see what are you good at, and don't look for the job you had, because the job you had might not be there. And a course costs a little bit money, but also job advice or a good conversation about work and opportunities, can be had. Just drop in digitally or physically in one of our premises of one of our competitors. Take it from there, be honest about yourself. Short term, take what's out there. Longer term, work towards a goal together with, again, the likes of us, supported by the Coursera's of this world. Yeah.
Steve, what are your thoughts about the unemployed or underemployed right now? What advice do you have for people?
Yeah, a couple things. I think one is something maybe a lot of us on this call here, this meeting, take for granted is digital literacy. Talk about these types of amazing resources. There's a little bit of that just notionally makes sense to us. I think number one is we need to make sure, and this is part of that public-private partnership, is that we're just raising the waterline in terms of digital literacy for the entirety of our population. That absolutely is a necessity. And so I think that does get back to Jacques' point a little bit around just access and digital infrastructure. But I think it's also that literacy line above that from a digital standpoint. So that's one. Two is there's an extraordinary, and I agree with Jeff's comment, like this is an unprecedented time for access to information and training and education and certification and degrees, all online, all digitally. But how do I know, even if I'm, say, a student on the left hand who just finished a marketing degree, but maybe I don't have the digital skills even after going through 4 years of school. I can't tell you the number of inbound inquiries that I get just on LinkedIn every day from students who have graduated looking for advice on how do I create that digital skill pack from literacy all the way up within this particular medium or operating medium that I want to be in. And then, of course, there's the folks that need to reskill. And the reality is for them, again, it's how do you, in this kind of sea of information, make those right choices? How do I get my baseline assessment of me, number one? And number two, for the job that I want to go get, or the career that whatever I'm passionate about, topic-wise, whatever that may be, where are my gaps? So I think we need more tooling for people that helps themselves, not companies, do that kind of skill gap assessment so that I can get that better roadmap. And I know companies like Jeff's, for example, and Jacques and others are helping with that, but that needs to be something that is more broadly offered and accessible. So I think literacy from a digital standpoint, I think comprehension in terms of if I'm that person looking to change my skill set, well, where's my passion area or career area of focus, and what is that skill gap area? If you can start to get awareness around those things, then you've profoundly raised your ability to go then action on that and ultimately find that gainful employment. And Jeff said, lever one of those 100 million plus above the 50 million we have today jobs that Microsoft asserts will be created.
I'm sorry to cut this conversation short, but I'm being told we have about 20 seconds left here. So I have to wrap this up. Thank you so much, Jeff, Jacques, Aruna, Steve. This was such a fruitful conversation. And I think, our audience members really took a lot of takeaways away to think through, what we do to reskill and retool ourselves going forward. Thank you so much, and I look forward to speaking to you all again.